Donkey Kong was the first character Miyamoto created for Nintendo in 1981. He would go on to save the company from bankruptcy. It seems like Nintendo is hyping the character up for a big return, with DK being a main character in the Super Mario Bros. Movie, a Donkey Kong Country expansion set to release in 2024 for the Super Nintendo World in Japan, and a rumor of a spin-off animated movie seems to be in the works. On the video game side, a massive 3D adventure is heavily rumored to be in development with the developers who worked on Super Mario Odyssey, because it's been almost 10 years since we had a mainline adventure in the Donkey Kong series, which makes me wonder, what happened to Donkey Kong? What happened to this franchise? I have a strong nostalgia for this franchise, as Donkey Kong Country 2 was one of the very first games I owned alongside Super Mario World when I was a kid. I feel very blessed to have two of the greatest games of all time as my first gaming experiences. So in this video, I wanted to give a retrospective about the different eras of Donkey Kong and try to make sense of what I think Nintendo is doing with the character. Starting off with the first era, 1981 to 1994. So Miyamoto was tasked with recreating Nintendo's arcade radar scope into a brand new game. Miyamoto came up with a storyline that was very akin to Popeyes and kind of took elements from King Kong. It was exclusively designed for American markets. He named it Donkey Kong, and donkey was a translation from the word meaning like dumb, stupid, or stubborn, and Kong meaning ape. Thus, he referred to him as Dumb Ape. The game would go on to be a huge success for the company, spawning multiple ports to many home consoles, and ports to platforms like Commodore and Atari. It would also, of course, get a port to Nintendo's first home console. The game would be followed up by Donkey Kong Jr., which introduced vine climbing, and Donkey Kong 3, which would again put Donkey Kong in the villain role, as you would play as a bug exterminator named Stanley, who was tasked with pushing DK to the top of the screen. We would never again see Stanley in a Nintendo game, except for showing up as a trophy in Super Smash Bros. Hudson Soft was planned to make a follow-up to Donkey Kong 3, but the game was never released. So yeah, like in the original lore, Donkey Kong was Mario's pet that escaped from his cage and ran loose. I thought that was pretty interesting. So these games would be the first era of Donkey Kong, and they were all developed, designed, and planned by Nintendo and Miyamoto. They all kept that original dumb ape aesthetic. These games would go on to be ported and released to the Virtual Console, e-reader, and forever referenced in future Nintendo games and pop culture. Nintendo technically ended this era of Donkey Kong with a release on the Game Boy in 1994, which would technically take place in this timeline. But this era would be the last time DK was seen as a main villain or dumb ape on the loose. Of course, until like the Mario vs. Donkey Kong games, which came out like in 2003. But in this era specifically, he was more of a villain. But Donkey Kong would be pivotal to saving Nintendo from bankruptcy, and the success of Donkey Kong is the reason Nintendo is still around today. I learned a lot about this era of Nintendo in a book called Super Mario: How Nintendo Conquered America by Jeff Ryan, which I would recommend reading. Fun fact, Universal filed a lawsuit against Nintendo in 1982 claiming that Donkey Kong was a ripoff of King Kong. However, the court ruled in favor of Nintendo in 1984, thanks to their lawyer John Kirby helping them win the lawsuit. And as a thanks, Nintendo named a character after him. It's funny that they named a character who sucks after a person who didn't suck. Anyway, I consider this next era, 1994 to 1999, to be Donkey Kong's golden era. Golden Banana Era! Because the Donkey Kong a lot of people know today was actually the Rareware rebooted Donkey Kong. Most gamers, including myself, consider the games released in this era to be the most beloved in the franchise. So as the story goes, in early 1990s, Rareware, a British game development studio founded by the Stamper brothers Tim and Chris, made significant strides in gaming technology and 3D rendering. This caught the attention of Nintendo. Then in the midst of a console war with Sega, they saw an opportunity with Rareware to reboot the Donkey Kong franchise and bring life to the aging Super Nintendo hardware with sick graphics, yo! Sick graphics, yo! Sega does what Nintendo? Whoa, rad graphics! Whoa! Look at those graphics! Tim Stamper, inspired by Mortal Kombat's digitized footage, wanted to utilize pre-rendered 3D graphics and compress them down to small images, giving the illusion that the game was being rendered in 3D. The result was Donkey Kong Country, a groundbreaking title released in November 1994. It was the first Donkey Kong game not in full control by Miyamoto. Rareware would go on to expand the Donkey Kong universe into what we know today. The game introduced Diddy Kong, Donkey Kong's nephew, and Cranky Kong, who was the original Donkey Kong from the arcade era. The Donkey Kong we know today was in fact a grown-up version of Donkey Kong Jr. This visual and conceptual refresh was a complete reboot of the series, no longer seeing Donkey Kong as a villain, and also introduced the iconic red tie. The choice to give Donkey Kong a tie was likely made to add a quirky and distinctive element to his character, but I always saw it as a very cheeky cheeky British touch. Wearing a red tie typically invokes strength, passion, and dominance, so maybe that was what they were going for. So the original designs Rare introduced saw DK as more of an aggressive and intimidating character, but Nintendo felt they had to step in and rein Rare back to give us the Donkey Kong we know today. I personally hate Miyamoto's original sketch, and I'm very glad he didn't flip the table on them and force Rare to use this, because he does it all the time. He's like, my ideas are the only good ideas and your ideas suck! Do it again! Following the massive success of Donkey Kong Country, Rare continued the Donkey Kong Country series with Donkey Kong Country 2, Dixie's Conquest in 1995. My autocorrect says Daddy's Conquest, and I'm just so traumatized by that statement. The game featured Diddy Kong and introduced Dixie Kong. It was designed to be more challenging and less linear and explored a pirate-themed adventure. Arrgh! Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, came out in 1996 with Dixie and a new character, Kiddy Kong. This installment aimed to incorporate 3DS gameplay and Zelda-inspired role-playing elements. Despite both games not including Donkey Kong as a playable character, both follow-ups to Donkey Kong Country were well-received, critically acclaimed, and contributed to the enduring legacy of the Donkey Kong franchise. After the release of Donkey Kong Country, Rare went hard at work on the fourth game in the Country universe for the Nintendo 64, which was Donkey Kong 64. Donkey Kong 64 would be considered Rareware's War and Peace, as they completely expanded on what they learned from Banjo-Kazooie, with this game feeling more like a follow-up to that game in spirit than Donkey Kong Country 3. The Wii U re-release in 2015 was the beginning of the 3D platformer resurgence, and the Wii U port is the most popular version of the game for speedrunning. The development of DK64 faced challenges in transitioning from the pre-rendered models of the Donkey Kong Country series to real-time 3D graphics using polygons. They lost the level of graphical detail seen in the Donkey Kong Country series, but real-time graphics allowed for more expressive characters. The game's strong emphasis on collectibles was a request from Tim Stamper to make Donkey Kong 64 more like the popular and well-received Banjo-Kazooie at the time. The expansion pack was included with the game and increased the N64's memory from 4 megabytes to 8 megabytes. According to a Rareware engineer who worked on the game, this enabled them to use the Vertex lighting system. This game, in my opinion, was the peak of Donkey Kong, and as many people, I have fond memories playing this game when it came out. But this would be the last Donkey Kong game that really pushed the boundaries on the series. The marketing of the game was very in your face. I can't express how great of a game Donkey Kong 64 was at the time, though not for everyone, since it had approximately 3,800 collectibles. I love it despite its flaws because it was a very engrossing adventure with a great soundtrack. I never knew the creepy castle theme was a rendition of the opening DK arcade theme. That's something I didn't know until it was in my 30s. This next era I call the purple monkey poop shaped like cubes era, because it was okay crap. So Nintendo sold Rareware to Microsoft in 2002, which is an event in my life that was very traumatic, okay? After that, it seemed like Nintendo had no idea what to do with the character. They developed a rhythm game called Donkey Konga in 2003 that was very similar to Taiko Drum Master. They then released the follow-up Donkey Konga 2 in 2005, which I owned and I really enjoyed as a rhythm game, not as a Donkey Kong game. Reggie Fils-Aimé, former Nintendo president at the time, was quoted as being very embarrassed by these games and wished they never came out, and kind of making the character a joke. The games were developed for the GameCube Bongo controller, which was a Donkey Kong themed peripheral. It kind of makes sense in the lore because in Donkey Kong 64 he had a set of bongos, but it was pretty lame. Despite it being a spin-off, I really enjoyed the game and I really loved smacking those bongos. Your mom would know. In my opinion, the best game from this era was Donkey Kong Jungle Beat. This was a second redesign of Donkey Kong, which took what worked from the Rareware series and made him more serious and very fluffy. The environments and bosses you battled in this game had so much attention paid to their design. This was the only time it seemed like Nintendo was trying to evolve the character and make him awesome again. A lot of the ideas from this game would later on be used in games like Super Mario Galaxy, like the floating water cubes, suspended in midair. I guess physics don't work in the Donkey Kong universe. At the end of the day, it was designed as a bongo game, since to make DK move, you had to constantly hit like one side of the bongos. They made it more about style and stringing together combos, and less about exploration and adventure, aspects that made the Donkey Kong Country games so beloved. They would go on to port the game to the Wii and replace replace the bongos with shaking the Wii remote and nunchuck to simulate playing bongos in midair. It was weird. The game confused a lot of casual players who thought it was a mainline 2D platformer Donkey Kong game. Another big flop from this era was Donkey Kong Barrel Blast. It actually ended up missing the GameCube and releasing on the Wii after a bunch of delays, again with simulated bongos with the Wii controllers to play. It was a racing game designed for the bongo controller, which involved players flying around on like rocket-powered bongos. I recently found this game at Value Village and I played it on my Wii U last year. I had FOMO because I thought I missed a really fun game that came out back in the day, but yeah, I played it and it didn't really click. Like, it didn't work for me. It was one of those ideas that sounded good on paper, but when you actually played it, things didn't feel right. You know what I mean? One thing I always had a problem with Nintendo for is that with this game and like the re-releases of Jungle Beat on the Wii, they didn't give you the option to use the bongo controller as a controller in the game. The original Wii had GameCube controller ports on them, and a lot of games on the Wii used the GameCube controller as like a separate control option, like in Brawl and Virtual Console games. So it's just weird that they didn't add that as an option to the game when it finally came out. Outside of the mainline Donkey Kong games, Donkey Kong and other characters from the universe would show up in Mario Party, Mario Kart, Smash Bros. He was once again just a playable character in a roster. Nintendo didn't really do much to support the franchise with proper mainline games that gamers would be excited about. He seemed like a side character for Nintendo, not the same character that once could stand toe-to-toe with Mario and Zelda. In my opinion, this was the worst era of Donkey Kong. The entire time I was just waiting for news on a mainline game, and also for Donkey Kong 64 to come to the Virtual Console, which it never did. It's fine.
Wait, why do I have two?
But the GameCube and early Wii wasn't really much for Donkey Kong. But I gotta say, the remix version of the DK rap in Super Smash Bros. Melee was great. And I love that they changed the part of the song where they refer to Chunky as one hell of a guy, because I was like personally offended that they were using mild swearing in the game, and I'm no longer offended or feeling uncomfortable about it. So that's great.
One hell of a guy.
Oh my god, he swore! Oh, I feel so shitty! How could they do that?
Nintendo also developed DK King of Swing that once again redesigned the character, but this time making him more cutesy and less cool. They would respond to that criticism in the follow-up on the DS, bringing back the Rareware style. These games are more of spin-offs and not really mainline Donkey Kong games. Of course, the ports of the Donkey Kong Country games to the Game Boy Advance were very incredible recreations of beloved games, adding more to each one and expanding the series lore, but these were remakes. It seems like all remakes made for the Game Boy Advance ended up being incredible. I also forgot about the Donkey Kong games on the Game Boy, because those were also good. But these were remakes. They didn't push the series forward. It felt like how Marvel movies and TV shows feel coming out today. It's just content. They're just giving us more content. Here's more Donkey Kong content, or donkey content. There's this theme I see a lot in the video game world where companies try to cash in on nostalgia instead of creating new great experiences that could be nostalgic and beloved in the future. It felt like Nintendo was cashing in on the hard work Rareware did to create brand trust and awareness, instead of creating something great. So this means that the creators of the franchise are the worst developers of a series they created. Donkey Kong would also end up being a character in Skylanders, and he was also in the recent Mario and Rabbids games. This brings us to the Returns era, 2010 to 2018.
We asked them to take one of the most treasured franchises in video game history and to make it magic again. If you listen, you can hear it coming.
At E3 2010, probably one of the best E3s Nintendo ever had, Donkey Kong Country Returns was revealed to applause. The game captured much of what fans wanted and was a significant release for the series. The game was being developed by Retro Studios, who brought Metroid back in a big way with the Metroid Prime series. The game not being developed by Nintendo was a green flag for a lot of people. It proved to be an exciting reboot of the series. Nintendo would reveal the follow-up game in a Nintendo Direct in 2013 to be released on the Wii U in 2014. The game actually didn't use the Wii U gamepad, which was also interesting. Although the game was a groundbreaking success, passionate fans of the series felt it didn't do much to set it apart from Returns, despite being HD and with improved graphics, and David Wise returning to compose the soundtrack. Also, I remember people feeling it released too close to the first Donkey Kong Country Returns, and a lot of people were disappointed that this was the game that Retro Studios has been working on for the last 3 years at the time. Many people wanted them to make a new Metroid Prime or reinvent another beloved Nintendo franchise. The game was great though, with many people claiming it to be one of the best games they've ever played. This was the last mainline Donkey Kong game, and it released almost almost 10 years ago, with the port of the Switch releasing 5 years ago, so the franchise has been laying dormant ever since. Aside from newer games featuring Donkey Kong as a playable character, as well as DK Mountain and Funky Kong recently being added to Mario Kart 8, there's been no official announcement on any upcoming mainline Donkey Kong games. Like I said in the beginning of this video, there are rumors of a massive 3D adventure coming, a movie, and there's a theme park opening up next year, but there's nothing from Nintendo in terms of a mainline release, besides the remake of Mario vs. Donkey Kong, which was a game from 2003. Like Super Mario RPG, it's interesting that they didn't have a subtitle on this release, meaning it could be a reboot of the Mario vs. Donkey Kong franchise. But this is a remake of a spin-off, and not the next mainline Donkey Kong game we are waiting for. Which makes me wonder, what happened to Donkey Kong? Given Nintendo's past handling of the character, there's hope that they will put an effort in this time to evolve the franchise in the gaming world, because it seems like they're putting a lot of attention on the character. There seems to be a resurgence, and maybe they plan to bring the character back in a huge way. I got 2 games for $90 with tax back in 2005. Hey, if you like the stuff I'm making on this channel, I hope you click subscribe and let me know in the comments what would you like to see from this franchise. Special thanks to GXR for this custom beat he made for this video, and thank you for watching. I will see you later. I'm gone like Donkey Kong!